night does something curious to history. It lowers its voice. It removes the confidence. Events that once arrived with banners and declarations begin to sound smaller, almost uncertain, as if they are no longer sure they deserve to be remembered the way they were taught. This story begins in that quieter register, before court rulings and armies and speeches about progress, before anyone decided that survival needed paperwork. It begins in a place that does not know it is about to become a lesson. Morning arrives in the southern Appalachian Mountains without announcement. There are no bells, no schedules, no reason to hurry. Light filters through clay walls and wooden beams, gentle and uninsistent. Smoke from a low fire lingers in the air, carrying the smell of wood and food and the last traces of sleep. Outside, mist settles into the valleys and clings to the ridges, so thick the mountains appear to breathe. This is Cherokee country, not as a boundary drawn on paper, but as a lived environment, shaped slowly by people who understood where they were and why. The land is not empty. It is not wild in the way outsiders will later insist it was. It is organized, tended, and deeply familiar. Towns sit where water and soil agree to cooperate. Fields stretch along riverbanks, planted with purpose rather than optimism. Trails follow the logic of the terrain, curving instead of conquering. This is not a frontier. It is a home, refined over centuries of attention. At the center of each town rises a mound of earth, flattened at the top by generations of rebuilding. On it stands the council house, circular and wide, built to hold people rather than impress them. Inside, a fire burns continuously. It is not ceremonial decoration. It is the center of civic life. The fire is tended, protected, respected. Let it go out and something essential is lost, not metaphorically, but practically. Continuity matters here, and it is maintained through routine rather than nostalgia. Homes cluster around the mound in quiet order. Each family has two, one open and breathable for summer, one compact and insulated for winter, partially sunk into the ground to hold warmth. Architecture without excess, comfort without guilt. No one argues that suffering builds character. Outside the town, fields grow corn, beans, and squash together, each plant doing something for the others. Corn lifts the beans. Beans enrich the soil. Squash shades the ground. It is agriculture based on cooperation, a concept that will later be treated as suspicious. What would surprise future visitors most, though, is not the farming or the town planning. It is who holds authority. Cherokee society is matrilineal. Identity flows through the mother. Property flows through the mother. Belonging flows through the mother. Children belong to their mother's clan. Homes belong to women. Fields belong to women. If a marriage ends, the man leaves with his name and not much else. This arrangement functions so well that no one writes long explanations defending it. Women are not symbolic figures in this world. They are decision makers. A council of women determines matters of war and peace. A beloved woman sits among the highest leaders and has the authority to decide the fate of prisoners. Her voice carries weight because it is believed the spirit of the world sometimes speaks through her. This belief produces order, not chaos. It is accepted calmly without philosophical debate. One imagines how confusing this would sound to societies where women were still negotiating permission to exist in public life. The Cherokee Nation is organized through 7 clans. These are not abstract identities. They are systems of responsibility. Your clan defines who you can marry, how justice is handled, and how balance is restored when harm occurs. Marriage within your clan is forbidden. Violence between clans requires restitution, not revenge. Justice is communal rather than personal. Your actions ripple outward and everyone knows it. Accountability is not enforced by fear of punishment alone, but by the knowledge that misbehavior burdens people you care about. Daily life unfolds without spectacle. Work is shared. If a house burns, it is rebuilt. If crops fail, food appears anyway. Orphans are absorbed without ceremony. Elders are cared for without being praised for it. This practice is called gadugi, communal labor for the good of all. No one claims credit. No one gives speeches. It simply happens, which is often how the most effective systems operate. There are rituals, of course. At dawn, people go to the river for cleansing, standing in cold water, facing the rising sun, asking to begin the day without carrying yesterday too heavily. Hunters pray before taking deer, asking permission rather than forgiveness. After a successful hunt, thanks are given, not as performance but as obligation. Nothing here suggests people believe the world exists for their convenience. This is a civilization, complex, adaptive, old. It has laws, ethics, humor, conflict, and compromise. It is not frozen in time or innocent of contradiction. It is simply functional in a way that does not require justification. The Cherokee do not know yet that this way of life will soon be evaluated by people who have already decided the outcome. They do not know that ships are being built far away, carrying animals larger than anything they have seen, weapons louder than thunder, and diseases that do not care about belief systems. For now, the fire still burns, the fields still grow, the clans still meet, the mountains still breathe, and history, mercifully quiet for the moment, has not yet begun to explain why all of this will be called insufficient. Order without kings. If you stay with the night long enough, certain assumptions begin to loosen. Ideas that feel permanent during daylight start to look more like habits. Power, for example. Who holds it? Who is supposed to? Who claims it loudly and who carries it quietly without ever naming it? In the Cherokee world, before interruption, authority does not sit on a throne. It does not wear a crown. It does not issue commands from a distance. It moves through relationships, obligations, and memory. And because of that, it is harder to see and much harder to break. The Cherokee do not wake up each morning thinking about government. Governance is not a separate activity here. It is embedded in daily life, woven into how people marry, how they raise children, how they resolve conflict, how they remember the dead. There is no single ruler whose will overrides the rest. Instead, there is a network of councils, clans, and responsibilities that balance each other slowly, deliberately, and sometimes frustratingly. Decisions take time. Consensus matters. Silence is often more important than speech. At the center of this system are the clans. 7 of them not as symbolic groupings, but as living frameworks. Your clan is not a label you choose. It is inherited through your mother, and it shapes nearly every aspect of your life. Who you can marry, who you call family, who you answer to when something goes wrong. Clan membership is permanent. You do not age out of it. You do not resign. It follows you from birth to death, and even beyond, because your actions reflect on those who came before and those who will come after. Marriage is regulated with quiet firmness. You cannot marry within your own clan, ever. Clan members are considered siblings regardless of distance or generation. To violate this rule is not a private mistake. It is a rupture in the moral fabric of the community. The consequence is severe, not because the society is cruel, but because balance is treated as a physical necessity. Certain lines cannot be crossed without tearing something that holds everyone together. Justice follows the same logic. There is no abstract legal code enforced by strangers. Responsibility is collective. If someone from one clan kills someone from another, whether intentionally or not, balance must be restored. The obligation falls on the clan, not just the individual. Another life may be required, but the goal is not revenge. It is equilibrium. This creates a powerful incentive for clans to regulate their own members. Everyone has a stake in everyone else behaving well. Accountability is constant and inescapable, which turns out to be more effective than fear of distant punishment. What makes this system function is not violence, but restraint. Conflicts are addressed early, mediation is preferred, councils meet, voices are heard, silence is allowed to stretch until it says what needs to be said. Decisions are not rushed because rushed decisions tend to fracture relationships. There is an understanding that harmony is not the absence of conflict, but the ability to move through it without destroying the whole. Women sit at the center of this structure, not as exceptions, but as anchors. Cherokee society is matrilineal, and that fact alone rearranges the usual expectations about power. Lineage passes through women, property passes through women, identity passes through women. A child belongs to the mother's clan, not the father's. This is not a symbolic gesture. It is practical. Women are the constants. Men may travel for hunting, war, or trade, but women remain rooted, holding households, fields, and continuity together. Political authority follows the same pattern. A council of women representing the clans holds real power over decisions of war and peace. This is not advisory. It is decisive. Women choose whether a war begins and whether it continues. At the highest level stands the beloved woman, a position earned through experience, wisdom, and trust, rather than inheritance or force. Her authority is spiritual and practical at once. She can speak in council. She can halt executions. She can grant mercy without needing justification. The belief underlying this role is simple and profound. The Cherokee understand that creation and destruction are not equal forces. Life comes through women. Continuity depends on them. If a society wants to survive, it listens carefully to those who carry that continuity in their bodies and daily labor. This belief does not require philosophical defense. It is observed reality. One imagines how unsettling this clarity would feel to cultures still debating whether authority must be loud to be real. Leadership among the Cherokee is situational rather than absolute. There are peace chiefs and war chiefs, each operating within clearly defined limits. A war chief does not rule in times of peace. A peace chief does not command warriors in battle. Power is contextual, activated only when necessary, and surrendered when its moment passes. No one accumulates authority indefinitely. No one is allowed to confuse usefulness with entitlement. This division prevents the kind of consolidation that later societies will call strength. It also prevents tyranny. Without a permanent ruler, there is no single figure to overthrow, corrupt, or assassinate. Change happens slowly through consensus and fatigue rather than coups. This makes the system resilient. It also makes it vulnerable to outsiders who mistake patience for weakness and complexity for confusion. Daily governance happens in the council house beneath the ever-burning fire. Elders speak, but they do not dominate. Younger voices are heard, but they do not rush. Decisions emerge gradually, shaped by stories, precedent, and collective memory. The past is not an abstract lesson here. It is a participant in every conversation. What happened before matters, not because it is sacred, but because it has already tested the consequences. Even labor reinforces this structure. The practice of gadugi, communal work for the good of all, is not charity. It is obligation. When someone's house burns, the community rebuilds it because allowing one family to fail weakens everyone. When crops fail, food is shared because hunger spreads faster than generosity. This logic is unromantic and effective. Survival is a group project. There are no kings in this world, no crowns, no inheritance of absolute power. Authority circulates, pauses, and moves on. It is held lightly and released without ceremony. This does not mean the society is gentle or naive. It means it is calibrated. Power exists, but it is constrained by relationships that cannot be ignored. This system has worked for centuries, long enough to prove that governance does not require domination, long enough to demonstrate that complexity does not need hierarchy to function. The Cherokee do not describe themselves as advanced or enlightened. They simply live within a structure that matches their understanding of balance. They do not know yet that they will soon be judged by outsiders who equate civilization with centralized authority and mistake adaptability for lack of order. They do not know that their refusal to crown a king will later be used as evidence that they never had a real government at all. For now, councils still meet. Clans still regulate themselves. Women still decide when blood must stop flowing. And power, quiet and distributed, continues to do its work without ever announcing its name. When strangers arrived. History rarely announces itself properly. It does not knock. It does not explain. It tends to arrive sideways, disguised as rumor, coincidence, or something that seems too strange to be real. In the Cherokee world, the first signs are not ships or flags or men with names worth remembering. They are stories that sound wrong, accounts that do not fit existing categories, descriptions that make people pause mid-sentence and look at one another, not afraid yet, just confused. At first, the reports travel faster than the strangers themselves. A hunter returning late mentions shapes on the horizon, animals taller than elk moving as if fused to men. A trader repeats a story he heard from another town, something about sticks that make thunder, about metal skins that arrows refuse to enter. These stories circulate quietly, reshaped each time they are told, softened by disbelief. After all, the world has rules. Everything encountered so far has fit within them. It is reasonable to assume this will too. Life continues as usual. Fields still need tending. The river still runs cold at dawn. Councils still meet. The sacred fire still burns. There is no reason to reorganize the universe based on rumors. Cherokee society is not impulsive. It waits for evidence. It prefers to observe before reacting. This patience has served it well for centuries. It will soon become a liability. When the strangers finally appear, they do not arrive as guests. They come in numbers large enough to feel intentional. They come riding animals the Cherokee have never seen before, animals that move with unnatural speed and height, collapsing the distance between predator and prey. They wear metal that catches the sun and turns it into glare. They carry weapons that speak louder than anything the mountains have ever echoed back. The man leading them is Hernando de Soto, though that name means nothing here and will not matter for long. He is not interested in conversation. He is not interested in understanding the land he moves through. He is interested in gold, which he has already decided exists somewhere ahead, and in supplies, which he takes without negotiation. He moves through the southeast like a passing storm, loud, destructive, and temporary, leaving behind damage that will last far longer than his presence. Cherokee towns are not built for this kind of intrusion. They are open by design, meant for trade, diplomacy, and shared ritual, not defense against mounted soldiers. When De Soto's men enter, they do not admire the fields or the council houses. They see food, labor, and leverage. They take corn from storage. They seize women and children to force cooperation. They kill men who resist, not out of cruelty exactly, but because resistance slows progress. The Cherokee fight back when they can. They are not passive, they are not unskilled, but bows and war clubs are suddenly inadequate against armor and firearms. Distance becomes lethal. Horses erase familiar advantages. Dogs trained to hunt people introduce a terror that does not belong to any previous category of danger. This is not war as the Cherokee understand it. It is something closer to predation. Then, just as abruptly as they arrived, the strangers move on. De Soto does not stay. He does not build alliances. He does not settle. He takes what he can and leaves, still convinced that the real prize lies further west. The Cherokee bury their dead, repair what can be repaired, and attempt to return to something resembling normal life. It is tempting to believe this was a singular event, a strange intrusion that will not repeat itself. What De Soto leaves behind is far more dangerous than his soldiers. It does not wear armor. It does not announce itself. It arrives quietly, carried in breath and skin and shared spaces. Diseases the Cherokee have never encountered begin to move through towns with terrifying efficiency. Smallpox, measles, influenza, names that do not exist yet in the Cherokee language because the concepts are new. At first it looks manageable. A fever here, a cough there. Then the patterns emerge. Skin erupts in sores that fill and burst. Fever climbs until delirium replaces speech. People weaken quickly, far more quickly than any illness they remember. The medicine people do what they have always done. They prepare herbs. They perform cleansing rituals. They take the sick to the river, trusting cold water to wash away imbalance. It does not work. In some cases, it makes things worse. The river that once healed now accelerates death. Entire households fall ill at once. Caregivers become patients. The dead accumulate faster than ceremonies can keep up. Fires go untended. Fields are left half-planted. Children wander between houses that no longer answer. The scale is impossible to grasp at first. Cherokee society has survived famine, conflict, and hardship before. Nothing has prepared it for this. Within a generation, as much as 90% of the population is gone. not migrated, not conquered, simply erased by something no one can see or fight. The consequences ripple outward. Clans lose members so quickly that some cannot fulfill their responsibilities. Elders die before passing on knowledge. Songs end mid-verse. Ceremonies lose their keepers. Sacred fires go out in towns where there is no one left to tend them. The carefully balanced system of governance begins to strain under the weight of absence. Survivors walk through familiar places that no longer feel inhabited. Houses stand empty with food still inside. Paths grow quiet. The landscape itself seems confused, holding the infrastructure of a civilization without the people who animated it. The Cherokee attempt to understand what they have done wrong. Their worldview assumes illness has meaning, that imbalance can be corrected, that the right action restores harmony. This time no correction comes. The old explanations do not hold. The spirits do not respond the way they always have. The survivors are left with grief that has no narrative. Loss without lesson. This uncertainty is as damaging as the deaths themselves. By the time Europeans return in greater numbers, the world they encounter is already wounded. Towns are smaller, councils quieter, defenses weakened not by defeat but by demographic collapse. Outsiders mistake this fragility for original weakness. They do not see the catastrophe that preceded them. They assume what they find is what always was. The Cherokee adapt because adaptation is what they do. They consolidate towns. They take in refugees from other groups. They adjust their expectations. They continue planting. They continue meeting. They continue believing that continuity is still possible, even if it now requires unfamiliar strategies. The strangers will return, next time with trade goods instead of chains, with treaties instead of torches, with alcohol instead of dogs. But the first arrival has already changed everything, not because of conquest, but because of exposure. The world has been opened, and what came through that opening cannot be sent back. The Cherokee do not yet know how long this process will last. They do not know that this was only the beginning. For now, they count the living. They bury the dead. They try to remember who they were before the coughing started. And somewhere far away, ships are being built again, carrying people who will look at this altered landscape and decide it was always meant to belong to them. The world that went quiet. Silence does not arrive all at once, it spreads. It begins as pauses where voices used to be, as small gaps in routines that no one comments on yet. A council meeting opens late because one elder does not arrive. A song is started but not finished because the woman who knew the ending is sick. A fire burns lower than usual because fewer hands tend it. At first, these changes feel temporary. People tell themselves the world has seasons. This one will pass. The sickness does not move like anything the Cherokee have known before. It does not respect strength or status. It does not care which clan you belong to or how carefully you have lived. It enters quietly and accelerates fast. A fever rises. A body weakens. Spots appear where skin was whole only hours before. Pain becomes constant, then overwhelming. People who were working in the fields one day are unable to stand the next. Some die before anyone understands what is happening to them. The medicine people work without rest. They prepare plants gathered over generations, remedies that have always worked before. They chant, they cleanse, They go to the river again and again, trusting cold water to reset what has gone wrong. In other times, illness meant imbalance. Balance could be restored. This time, nothing responds. The rituals continue because stopping them would mean admitting something far more frightening, that the world has introduced a problem without a solution. Families collapse inward, caregivers become patients, children sit beside parents who no longer recognize them, entire households fall sick at once, leaving no one well enough to help anyone else. Bodies pile up faster than they can be buried properly. The ground fills with hurried graves. Sometimes there is no time for ceremony. Sometimes there are no elders left to lead it. The smell changes first, then the sound. Towns that once hummed with work and conversation grow unnaturally quiet. Dogs wander between empty houses waiting for owners who will not return. Food spoils in storage pits because no one is left to eat it. Fields go untended, not from neglect, but from absence. Corn grows tall and dry, unharvested, bending under its own weight. Numbers begin to circulate, though no one likes to speak them aloud. One family gone, 2 clans diminished, entire towns emptied. The scale is too large to process emotionally. Before contact, the Cherokee population may have been close to 100,000. Within a few decades, perhaps only 10,000 remain. 9 out of every 10 people gone. The mind resists this reality. It feels like a mistake in counting rather than an accurate measure of loss. The clan system strains under the weight of disappearance. Responsibilities that once rotated smoothly now fall on too few shoulders. Some clans lose so many members that they cannot fulfill their roles. Knowledge that was meant to pass slowly from elder to apprentice vanishes overnight. Songs are remembered without their meanings. Ceremonies are performed incorrectly because the correct way is no longer known. Sacred fires go out in towns where no one remains to tend them. When a fire dies, something beyond heat is lost. Continuity breaks. The survivors search for explanation. Cherokee worldview assumes events have causes that can be understood. Illness is not random. It is the result of imbalance, offense, or neglect. The right action should correct it, but here, no action works. The old logic collapses. People begin to wonder whether the spirits have turned away or whether the world itself has changed its rules without warning. Grief becomes layered. There is grief for the dead, grief for the living who are no longer themselves, and grief for the certainty that once structured everything. The question is not only who has died, but whether the explanations that once made life coherent are still valid. This is a quiet crisis, harder to see than burned towns or fallen warriors, but far more destabilizing. The landscape itself begins to feel wrong. Places designed for many now hold few. Council houses echo. Paths grow over. The land remembers a population that is no longer there. Survivors walk through familiar spaces and feel like intruders in their own past. This disorientation settles deep, altering how people understand time. The past feels too large. The future feels impossibly small. And yet life continues. It has to. Survivors gather together, consolidating towns, combining clans where possible. They adopt orphans without hesitation because the alternative is unthinkable. They share what remains because hoarding in a shrinking world makes no sense. Adaptation is not a choice, it is reflex. When Europeans return in greater numbers, They encounter a society already wounded. They see smaller towns and assume they have always been small. They see fewer people and assume there were never many to begin with. They interpret survival as weakness rather than evidence of catastrophe endured. The Cherokee do not have the language to explain what has happened in terms outsiders will accept. There is no ledger documenting 90% loss. There is only absence. Trade begins to replace warfare as the primary point of contact. Europeans want deer skins. The Cherokee still have land, still have skill, still have knowledge of the forests. Trade offers stability, at least temporarily. Metal tools are useful. Guns make hunting easier. Cloth lasts longer than tanned hide. These goods feel like solutions to problems created by loss. But trade introduces new imbalances. Hunting shifts from sustenance to profit. Deer populations decline under pressure to meet European demand. Alcohol enters communities without any cultural framework to contain it. Traders discover quickly that intoxication makes negotiations easier. Debts accumulate, agreements become slippery, decisions made under influence carry consequences long after sobriety returns. The Cherokee recognize the danger. Leaders ask colonial authorities to restrict alcohol sales. The requests are ignored. Disorder benefits traders. Addiction becomes another form of control, less visible than chains but just as effective. Families fracture under its weight. Violence increases. Shame spreads quietly, settling into places already weakened by grief. Through all of this, the Cherokee adapt again. They learn the rules of trade. They become diplomats between competing European powers. They navigate alliances carefully, shifting when necessary to preserve what remains. They are not passive victims. They are active participants in a game they did not design, played on a board that keeps shrinking beneath their feet. Still, the damage done by disease never fully heals. Population loss alters everything. Defense becomes harder, recovery slower. The clan system, once robust, now operates under constant strain. Every decision carries higher stakes because there are fewer people to absorb mistakes. Survival becomes more deliberate, less forgiving. The quiet that settled during the epidemics never fully lifts. Even in moments of rebuilding, there is an underlying awareness that the world is more fragile than it once seemed. Certainty has been replaced by caution, confidence by vigilance. The Cherokee do not forget who they were, but they are forced to acknowledge that returning fully to that world may be impossible. This is the context in which later conflicts unfold. Not a pristine society encountering disruption for the first time, but a civilization already reshaped by loss on a scale almost impossible to comprehend. Every treaty, every war, every adaptation that follows is influenced by this earlier catastrophe. It is the invisible foundation beneath everything that comes after. Outsiders will later write histories that begin with wars and removals, as if the story starts there. They will miss the quieter destruction that made resistance harder and compromise more necessary. They will describe a people diminished without asking why. The epidemics will fade into footnotes. The silence will go unexplained. But for the Cherokee, this period is the turning point, the moment when the world they understood ended, not with an explosion, but with a gradual fading. Fires going out, voices missing, paths growing over. And yet even here, even now, the people remain. scarred, reduced, changed, but still present. They count the living, they remember the dead, they adjust their expectations of the future. Survival becomes less about preserving perfection and more about carrying something forward, even if it arrives altered. The world has gone quiet, but it has not gone empty. And in that thin space between loss and continuation, the Cherokee begin preparing unknowingly for challenges that will demand every skill this long night has taught them. The price of survival. Trade arrives the way most compromises do, quietly, politely, dressed as practicality. It does not kick down doors or burn towns at first. It offers tools that work better, cloth that lasts longer, metal that does not shatter, and the comforting illusion that survival can be negotiated like a price at a market stall. After the epidemics, after the long season of absence, the Cherokee world is thinner than it once was. There are fewer hands to plant and rebuild, fewer voices to carry stories, fewer elders to correct mistakes before they become habits. In that kind of world, stability becomes a craving, and anything that resembles order begins to look like kindness. European traders come looking for deer skins, and the demand is enormous. In places far away, deer leather is the texture of luxury, turned into gloves, book bindings, fine coats, and the sort of soft respectability that people like to pretend is natural. The Cherokee have deer, forests, and a knowledge of the land that makes European hunters look like children wandering into a storm. The exchange seems simple. Skins for tools, skins for cloth, skins for guns, skins for the small comforts that make the hard edges of life a little less sharp. At first it works. Metal axes bite deeper into wood, knives keep their edge, kettles make cooking easier, cloth is warm and durable, guns make hunting faster, and in a world still recovering from catastrophe, speed feels like a miracle. There is even a faint pride in the adaptation. Look, the Cherokee can learn, can trade, can shape the new world into something usable. Nobody thinks of this as surrender. It feels like the opposite. It feels like control. But economies change the meaning of things before anyone notices. A deer is no longer only meat and hide. It becomes a unit, a token, a portable argument for more goods. Hunting shifts from sustenance to production, from balance to volume. The forest begins to feel less like a living system and more like inventory. You can almost hear the old logic of reciprocity clearing its throat, politely in the corner, waiting to be acknowledged, while everyone pretends not to notice. The deer do not vanish overnight. They thin out slowly, and that slowness is the trap. Hunters travel farther. The best grounds become crowded. Neighboring nations, drawn into the same trade economy, compete for the same shrinking supply. Tensions rise in places where boundaries used to be understood without paperwork. The land remains the same, but the relationship to it becomes sharper, more anxious. The old idea of enough begins to fade, replaced by the new idea of more. Then there is alcohol, introduced with the casual confidence of people who never suffer the consequences. Rum and whiskey enter trade posts, like a friendly guest who turns out to be the worst person at the gathering, but nobody wants to admit it because he brought gifts. The Cherokee have no inherited framework for it, no ritual to contain it, no old warnings passed from grandparents who have seen it destroy families. The traders figure this out quickly with the efficient curiosity of professionals. Alcohol becomes leverage. Show up with rum, loosen tongues, blur memory, and watch agreements soften in your favor. Create debts that feel harmless when everyone is laughing, then collect when the laughter is gone. Encourage a habit, then punish the people for having it. It is an old trick, and it works because it does not need force, just repetition. The Cherokee leaders recognize what is happening. They ask colonial authorities to restrict sales. The requests are ignored. And of course they are. Why would anyone put out a fire that keeps their hands warm? The social costs accumulate. Families fracture. Arguments escalate faster. Violence rises where restraint once held. Shame spreads quietly because shame always prefers silence. Communities that survived epidemics now find themselves dealing with a different kind of sickness, one that does not kill in a week but eats away at the structures that keep people bound to each other. This is not dramatic, not cinematic, not a single event you can point to and say, here, this is where everything turned. It is a steady erosion, the slow wearing down of trust. Trade also changes time. Men spend longer away from home, hunting not just for food, but for profit. The fields receive less attention. Corn and beans still grow, but the rhythm shifts. Subsistence becomes secondary to the market. And the market is not interested in whether your children eat. The market wants deer skins, and it wants them now. It is strange how quickly an outside demand can become the center of a life, like a distant drum dictating the pace of footsteps on a trail. And yet the Cherokee adapt because adaptation is what they do. They become skilled negotiators, they become middlemen, connecting European traders with other nations farther inland. They learn which goods matter most, which alliances are useful, which promises are empty. They are not passive. They are players. But the game is not theirs. The rules are written elsewhere, and the penalties always seem to be paid inland. Because land is the real currency. Trade is the surface story, the respectable cover. Underneath, the pressure never stops. Settlers move closer. They build cabins where cabins were not agreed upon. They plant where planting was never granted. When disputes rise, settlers appeal to colonial authorities who share their language and their assumptions. The Cherokee appeal to treaty promises that are already being edited in practice, quietly, without the embarrassment of saying so. European powers compete, and the Cherokee are forced into a diplomatic dance that looks elegant only from a distance. The British want allies, the French want influence, the Spanish want buffers. Each empire offers protection against the others, as if protection is a product and not a temporary arrangement that expires the moment it becomes inconvenient. The Cherokee take what they can, they shift when needed. They fight alongside one power, then negotiate with another. It is strategy, not confusion. It is survival in a world where refusing to play means being removed from the board. War changes everything each time it touches Cherokee territory. It is no longer bounded by the older rules of balance and restitution. European war is louder, more total, less interested in restoring harmony than in breaking capacity. Towns burn, crops are destroyed, granaries are emptied. Civilians become targets because civilians are leverage. And after every war comes a treaty that pretends to be peace, but functions like a bill. The bill is always land. Hunting grounds are ceded. River boundaries are redrawn. Paths that once belonged to everyone become lines on a map, owned by someone else. Cherokee world shrinks in increments that are small enough to be defended as reasonable. Just this strip, just this valley, just this border adjustment. It is amazing how politely theft can be spoken when it is broken into manageable portions. Inside Cherokee society, new divisions form. Wealth concentrates among those who benefit most from trade, those with access to markets, those who can navigate colonial systems, those with mixed ancestry who move more easily through English language spaces. A class of prosperous Cherokee emerges, owning larger farms, building houses that resemble settler homes, adopting European clothing and practices. For some, this looks like security. For others, it looks like a slow surrender, dressed up as sophistication. The old matrilineal structure begins to strain under these influences. European norms privilege male ownership and patriarchal authority. Over time, some Cherokee families absorb these ideas, not because they are convinced by them, but because they are rewarded for performing them. It is difficult to maintain a system when the dominant power keeps paying people to abandon it. The Women's Council still exists, and its moral weight still matters in many towns. But the ground under it shifts. Power becomes more centralized in certain circles, and the old balance becomes harder to maintain. Religion enters in a similar way. Missionaries bring schools and sermons and the promise that adopting certain beliefs will make the Cherokee more acceptable, more protected, more human in the eyes of settlers. Some Cherokee convert, some resist. Many do something in between, blending old practices with new language, keeping ceremonies while attending church, learning English while speaking Cherokee at home. Identity becomes layered, complex, occasionally exhausting. There is a quiet irony in all this. The Cherokee are told explicitly and implicitly that survival depends on becoming more like the colonizers, learn their tools, adopt their structures, mirror their values, and the Cherokee do, sometimes impressively, sometimes painfully, because what else can they do when the alternative has already been demonstrated by empty towns and silent fires? They adapt not because they are weak, but because they refuse to disappear. Still, the cost keeps rising. Deer grow scarce, alcohol continues to destabilize, settlers press closer, treaties tighten like a rope drawn slowly around a waist. Each compromise feels temporary, each adaptation feels strategic, and yet the overall direction never changes. The Cherokee do not fall all at once. They are pressed, they are squeezed, they are negotiated into smaller and smaller spaces. And through it all, life continues. Children are born, councils meet, fields are planted, ceremonies are held, sometimes with fewer people, sometimes with altered words, but held nonetheless. The Cherokee do what human beings always do when the world insists on breaking them. They learn to carry the pieces, to rebuild with what remains, to pretend for a moment that the new arrangement might last. The price of survival is not paid in one dramatic moment. It is paid in daily adjustments, in choices made under pressure, in small concessions that accumulate into permanent loss. It is paid in the slow fatigue of constantly having to prove you deserve to exist. And the darkest part is this: even when you pay, even when you adapt, even when you negotiate like a master, the people demanding the payment may still decide they want everything anyway. Wars that were supposed to settle things. War does not arrive here as a sudden break from peace. It arrives as paperwork with sharp edges, as promises that come with conditions written too small to read comfortably. By the middle of the 18th century, the Cherokee are no longer strangers to conflict. They have learned the rhythms of European power struggles the way one learns an unfamiliar weather pattern, by watching carefully and adjusting posture rather than expecting fairness. Every war that moves through their territory claims to be temporary. Every treaty that follows claims to be final. Neither ever is. The land the Cherokee occupy sits between competing empires, and that position turns them into a resource rather than a people. British, French, and Spanish interests overlap and collide across the southeast, each side eager to control trade routes, buffer zones, and alliances. The Cherokee are courted, pressured, flattered, and threatened in equal measure. One season they are allies, the next, obstacles. Loyalty becomes a fragile thing when survival depends on reading intentions that are rarely spoken, honest. The Anglo-Cherokee War begins this way, with misunderstandings that quickly harden into grievances. British colonists accuse Cherokee warriors of attacking settlers. The Cherokee respond that settlers have crossed agreed boundaries and claimed land without permission. Both statements are true. Both sides feel justified. The difference lies in who has the larger population, the louder weapons, and the courts that recognize only. What follows is a series of retaliations that feel almost procedural. Settlements are attacked, towns are burned, crops are destroyed deliberately because starvation is an efficient weapon. The Cherokee fight with skill and determination, defending. When peace is declared, it arrives wrapped in documents. Treaties are signed, apologies are exchanged, borders are redrawn. The Cherokee are assured that this time the lines will hold. They rarely do. Each conflict resolves not by restoring what was taken, but by formalizing its loss. War does not correct injustice. It updates the map. This cycle repeats with exhausting regularity. Conflict, destruction, treaty, concession. The Cherokee grow fluent in diplomacy because ignorance is fatal. Leaders learn English. They learn legal language. They learn how to argue within systems never designed to hear them. They send delegations. They negotiate terms. They appeal to promises made by previous governors who are no longer in office when those promises are tested. The settlers continue to arrive regardless. Families push westward, driven by land hunger and encouraged by colonial authorities who find expansion politically convenient. Cabins appear beyond agreed borders. Fields are planted where no permission was given. When challenged, settlers claim ignorance or necessity. When violence erupts, blame is assigned selectively. Cherokee resistance is labeled aggression. Settler encroachment is called progress. Each treaty shrinks the Cherokee world incrementally. Hunting grounds become smaller. Travel routes are cut. Rivers turn into borders that can no longer be crossed freely. The land still looks the same, but access to it is increasingly restricted. Familiar places become distant even while remaining visible, a psychological cruelty that does not register in legal terms. By the time of the American Revolution, the Cherokee find themselves navigating yet another shift in power. British authority weakens. Colonial governments rebrand themselves as something new. The Cherokee are forced to decide which side offers the least dangerous future. Some align with the British, hoping loyalty will preserve territory against settler expansion. Others attempt neutrality. Neither strategy delivers security. When the war ends, the Cherokee are on the losing side by association. The new United States inherits British assumptions about land and sovereignty, along with a stronger appetite for westward growth. Treaties signed with the British are declared irrelevant. New treaties are drafted under American authority, often duplicating old concessions and adding new ones. The language of independence does not include indigenous independence. Violence does not pause. Frontier skirmishes continue. Settlers attack Cherokee towns, militias retaliate. The pattern is familiar now, almost routine. Destruction followed by negotiation followed by further loss. Cherokee leaders understand that resistance invites punishment, but accommodation does not prevent dispossession. It only slows it. The pressure intensifies as population growth accelerates. Land becomes more valuable. Patience wears thin. States begin to assert authority over Cherokee territory, despite existing treaties that recognize Cherokee sovereignty. Georgia is particularly aggressive, passing laws that undermine Cherokee governance and encourage illegal settlement. The federal government hesitates, torn between treaty obligations and political convenience. Throughout this period, the Cherokee attempt to adapt in good faith. They rebuild towns. They adopt farming practices that align with American expectations. They establish centralized leadership structures to present a clearer political front. They believe, not unreasonably, that demonstrating order and stability will earn respect and protection. This belief is not foolish. It is human. It assumes that rules matter because they are rules. It assumes that agreements mean something beyond the moment they are signed. The Cherokee do not yet realize that the real issue is not whether they govern themselves well, but whether their land is desired more than their existence is tolerated. War continues to serve as a tool of pressure rather than resolution. Each outbreak creates justification for further concessions. Each act of defense is reframed as hostility. Each attempt at neutrality is interpreted as weakness. The Cherokee are trapped in a logic that offers no winning move, only degrees of loss. What makes this period particularly exhausting is its ambiguity. There is no single invasion to point to, no dramatic fall of a capital. There is only a steady accumulation of disadvantages, layered treaty upon treaty, skirmish upon skirmish. The Cherokee do not wake up one day defeated. They wake up gradually constrained. And yet governance continues. Councils meet, leaders argue, women still exert influence, though increasingly challenged by European patriarchal norms. Clans still matter, even as external pressure strains their authority. The Cherokee hold on to their identity not through stubborn isolation, but through constant adjustment. By the early 19th century, it is clear that war has become a language the Cherokee never chose but must speak fluently to survive. Treaties promise peace, but function as mechanisms of erosion. Each agreement is framed as necessary, each concession justified as temporary. None are reversed. The Cherokee learn a bitter lesson in this era. Doing everything right does not guarantee safety. Negotiating honorably does not ensure fairness. Proving civility does not protect sovereignty. War and treaties are not opposites. They are parts of the same process, alternating tools used to achieve the same end. Still, the Cherokee endure. Not because the system rewards them, but because giving up would mean erasing generations of memory and meaning. They prepare for the next phase, though they do not yet know its full shape. They sense that the rules are changing again, that land hunger is hardening into policy rather than accident. The wars that were supposed to settle things never do. They only clarify one truth with increasing sharpness. Survival will require not just resilience, but reinvention on a scale the Cherokee have never attempted before. The woman who tried to slow the world down. By the time Nancy Ward becomes a figure people listen to, the Cherokee world is already exhausted, not defeated, not silent, just worn thin by repetition. Too many wars that were meant to be the last. Too many treaties that promised calm and delivered rearranged suffering. This is not the dramatic exhaustion of a battlefield. It is quieter. It lives in councils that meet again to discuss land that was discussed before, in elders who remember promises that no longer surprise anyone when they are broken. Nancy Ward enters this moment not as a rebel, but as a reminder. She does not appear to stop history, she appears to slow it, if only slightly, like a hand placed against a door that insists on closing. Her authority comes from a place older than treaties, older than colonial borders. She is a beloved woman, a title that sounds ceremonial until one realizes what it means in practice. It means her voice carries weight in matters of life and death. It means she can interrupt violence without asking permission. She has earned that authority through action rather than inheritance. As a young woman, she follows her husband into battle against the Creek. When he is killed, she does not retreat. She picks up his weapon and continues the fight. Courage in Cherokee society is not a performance, it is a contribution. Her actions alter the outcome of the battle, and afterward, the elders recognize something undeniable. She has crossed a threshold. She is named Giga, beloved woman. This title places her in a position that confounds European observers, a woman who can decide the fate of prisoners, a woman who speaks in council alongside chiefs, a woman whose authority does not come from marriage or permission, but from recognition by the community. Europeans, accustomed to their own rigid hierarchies, struggle to categorize her. The Cherokee do not. They already know what she is. As violence between settlers and Cherokee communities intensifies, Nancy Ward consistently chooses a path that feels almost unreasonable. She chooses restraint. When warriors call for retaliation, she argues for caution. When captives are brought before her, she often chooses mercy. She does not deny the reality of injustice. She has seen burned towns and stolen land. She has buried friends and family. Her refusal to escalate is not ignorance. It is calculation. She understands something that many around her are still struggling to accept. The enemy does not experience loss the same way. Settlers replace the dead with newcomers. Destroyed cabins are rebuilt by families who never knew the original inhabitants. Cherokee losses, by contrast, remove knowledge, relationships, continuity. Every death costs more than a single life. It costs memory. Nancy Ward attempts to operate within this asymmetry. She learns English, she marries a white trader, she raises children who move between worlds. This is not assimilation as surrender, it is proximity as intelligence. She understands that influence requires access, and access requires familiarity. Her home becomes a space where Cherokee and settlers interact not as abstractions, but as people who must look each other in the eye. Her most controversial actions come during moments of peak tension. When Cherokee warriors prepare attacks on frontier settlements, Nancy Ward quietly warns the settlers. She does not do this because she values settlers more than her own people. She does it because she knows what follows an attack: retaliation, burning towns, crops destroyed, children killed. She calculates backward, from consequence rather than forward, from anger. This earns her admiration from colonial officials and suspicion from some Cherokee. To those who have lost too much already, her restraint feels like betrayal. It is difficult to explain patience to people standing in ashes. Nancy Ward does not expect gratitude. She expects survival. Her intervention in the case of Lydia Bean reveals another dimension of her strategy. When a white woman is captured and sentenced to death, Nancy Ward intervenes. She orders her release and brings her into her own home. This is not an act of charity alone. It is an exchange. Lydia Bean teaches Nancy Ward dairy practices unfamiliar to the Cherokee: butter, cheese, new methods of food preservation, skills that can sustain people through scarcity. Knowledge becomes currency. Mercy becomes infrastructure. Nancy Ward understands that the future will belong to those who adapt without disappearing. She is not trying to preserve a frozen version of Cherokee life. She is trying to preserve Cherokee people. As American independence solidifies, pressures intensify. The new nation speaks the language of liberty while practicing expansion with renewed confidence. Settlers no longer see themselves as subjects pushing against imperial borders. They see themselves as rightful owners of a continent. Cherokee land is no longer inconvenient. It is inevitable. Nancy Ward continues to argue for peace, even as her influence begins to erode. Cherokee society itself is changing under pressure. Patriarchal norms imported through trade and mission work weaken the traditional authority of women. Councils shift. Power consolidates in ways that mirror American governance structures. The space Nancy Ward occupies becomes narrower. Still, she speaks. At treaty negotiations, she addresses American officials directly, reminding them that women are the mothers of nations, that peace is not weakness, that survival requires restraint from those who have power. Some listen, many do not. Her words enter the record, then slide off the machinery of policy. She grows older watching a strategy she believes in: lose ground. Not because it is wrong, but because it is outmatched. The appetite for land does not respond to moral arguments. It responds to force, law, and numbers. Nancy Ward has access to none of these in sufficient quantity. By the time she sends her final plea to the Cherokee Council, urging them not to sell any more land, the decision has already been made. The world she is trying to slow down is accelerating beyond her reach. She is not ignored out of disrespect. She is ignored because urgency has replaced deliberation. Nancy Ward dies before the worst arrives. She does not witness forced removal. She does not see the stockades or the trail. There is a quiet cruelty in this mercy. She is spared the confirmation of her fears, but her legacy remains. Embedded in a question the Cherokee will carry forward. Is survival better served by resistance or by adaptation? Is peace an act of courage or denial? How much can be given up before the core disappears? Nancy Ward does not answer these questions definitively. She lives them. She embodies the cost of choosing restraint in a world that rewards aggression. She proves that morality does not guarantee victory, but it can preserve humanity, even when victory is impossible. Her story marks the end of an era where individual intervention could meaningfully alter outcomes. What comes next will not hinge on persuasion or mercy. It will hinge on systems, policies, and decisions made far from Cherokee towns. The ground is shifting again, faster now. The Cherokee are about to attempt something unprecedented. If they cannot slow the world, they will try to remake themselves to survive within it. The man who decided words should not disappear. By the time Sequoia begins scratching symbols onto bark and scraps of paper, the Cherokee are no longer debating whether the world is changing. That argument is over. The only remaining question is whether change will erase them quietly, or whether they will manage to leave fingerprints on whatever comes next. This is not a romantic moment. There is no thunder, no vision, no elder council commissioning a grand solution. There is just a man with a limp, working alone, convinced that something essential is slipping away faster than anyone wants to admit. Sequoia does not set out to save his people. That framing comes later, applied by others who prefer clean narratives. What he notices first is simpler and more unsettling. He notices that white traders can make marks, and those marks can travel. He notices that agreements, debts, orders, and laws seem to gain power once they are written down. Spoken words vanish into memory. Written words linger, multiply, and harden into authority. This imbalance does not escape him. In Cherokee society, memory has always been enough. Stories, laws, ceremonies, and knowledge are carried through repetition and responsibility. Elders remember because they must. Children learn because they are embedded in a web of obligation. But disease has already torn holes in this system. Wars have scattered families. Treaties have introduced new concepts faster than oral tradition can comfortably absorb. Memory is no longer a stable foundation. Too many people who should remember are gone. Sequoia cannot read English. This is important. He is not copying a system he understands. He is reverse engineering power from the outside. He watches marks being made. He watches reactions. He observes cause and effect without the distraction of literacy. To him, writing is not language. It is mechanism, a way to trap sound so it cannot escape. When he begins his work, he does so without encouragement. His neighbors are suspicious. His wife is worried. His children are hungry. The farm needs attention. Silver work pays bills. None of these things align with sitting alone, muttering to yourself, filling surfaces with symbols that no one else recognizes. In a community already under stress, obsession looks irresponsible. It also looks dangerous. Some believe he is practicing witchcraft. Making thoughts visible feels like crossing a boundary. Others believe he is simply broken. A man who cannot hunt well cannot fight well, now wasting time on marks that feed no one. These judgments are not cruel, they are practical. Cherokee society values contribution. For years, Sequoia appears to be contributing nothing. He begins with the wrong idea. He tries to create a symbol for every word. This fails quickly. The language is too rich, too flexible. The symbols multiply faster than he can control them. He destroys his own work and starts again. Failure is not dramatic here. It is quiet and repetitive. Months pass, then years. At one point, his wife burns his work, not in anger exactly, in exhaustion, in fear, in the reasonable belief that whatever he is doing is consuming their future rather than building it. Sequoia does not argue. He does not abandon the project either. He simply starts again, carrying the system in his head now rather than on fragile scraps. The breakthrough comes when he stops, thinking about words, and starts listening to sound. Cherokee is not English. It does not break neatly into letters. It moves in syllables, clusters of sound that repeat across words in predictable ways. Once he recognizes this, the problem changes shape. He no longer needs thousands of symbols. He needs dozens. This realization is not dramatic. It does not arrive fully formed. It is tested, adjusted, doubted, and tested again. Slowly, a system emerges. Each symbol corresponds to a syllable. Any word can be written by combining them. Any spoken phrase can be captured. The language can now survive separation from the speaker. Sequoia borrows shapes from English letters without borrowing their meanings. This confuses missionaries and delights linguists later. To him, shape is utility. Meaning belongs to sound. He creates something entirely new by refusing to respect the boundaries of existing systems. When he finally presents his work to Cherokee leaders, skepticism is immediate. Why would anyone believe this man, illiterate by European standards, has accomplished something no one else has? The test he proposes is simple and devastating. His daughter writes what the elders say. He reads it back, perfectly. What follows is not gradual adoption. It is explosion. Literacy spreads through the Cherokee nation with shocking speed. Children learn in days. Adults learn in weeks. Elders who believe themselves too old find they can read the language they have spoken all their lives. Writing no longer belongs to missionaries. It belongs to everyone. This matters more than anyone fully realizes at first. The syllabary does not just record words, it rearranges power. Laws can be written. Decisions can be shared across distance without distortion. Knowledge no longer dies with the person who holds it. Memory becomes portable. Within a few years, the Cherokee are among the most literate populations in the region. This fact unsettles white observers. Literacy was supposed to be a marker of superiority. It was supposed to justify control. Now the Cherokee have surpassed their neighbors in the very skill meant to measure civilization. The Cherokee do not stop at literacy. They move logically from writing to governance. A written constitution follows, courts, schools, a newspaper. The Cherokee Phoenix carries news in both English and Cherokee. The message is unambiguous. We are not disappearing. We are documenting ourselves. Sequoia becomes famous. He receives medals, praise, recognition from people who once dismissed him. He accepts these honors without fanfare. He is not interested in celebration. He is interested in distribution. He travels, teaching the syllabary wherever he can, convinced that its power lies in use, not in admiration. There is a quiet tragedy here. The Cherokee believe briefly that this will be enough, that proving competence will secure safety, that demonstrating civilization will earn respect. It is a reasonable belief. It is also wrong. Writing cannot stop hunger for land. Literacy does not outweigh gold. Constitutions do not restrain governments that benefit from ignoring them. The Cherokee will soon discover that the problem was never misunderstanding. It was desire. Still, the syllabary is not wasted. It preserves identity during catastrophe. During removal, people carry written prayers, letters, and records. In exile, they rebuild schools faster than expected. Language survives where it should have been crushed. Sequoyah dies believing he has given his people something permanent. In this, he is correct. Even when governments dissolve, even when land is stolen, even when children are sent to schools designed to erase them, the language endures. Symbols scratched by a man no one believed in continue to speak. The Cherokee are about to enter the most brutal phase of their history. Writing will not save them from it, but it will ensure that what happens is remembered accurately in their own words, not only in the language of those who forced it upon them. This is not victory. It is continuity. And sometimes, in a long enough history, that is the most radical act available. When the law agreed and reality did not. By the late 1820s, the Cherokee are no longer improvising survival. They are executing a plan. It is careful, deliberate, and exhausting. Every step is designed to answer a single accusation that has followed them for generations: that they are incapable of self-government, that they exist outside law, that they must be managed rather than respected. The Cherokee decide with remarkable discipline to confront this claim on its own terms. They do not shout, they do not attack, they do not retreat, they build. A written constitution is adopted, modeled deliberately on the structure of the United States. Executive power, legislative councils, courts, rights spelled out in ink rather than memory, land declared collectively owned, authority defined, limits established. It is a declaration not of rebellion, but of comprehension. We understand how nations are supposed to function. We can do this too. John Ross rises to prominence in this moment. He is not what Americans expect a Cherokee leader to look like. He speaks English fluently. He dresses like a Southern gentleman. His education is American. His manners familiar. By blood, he is mostly Scottish. By Cherokee law, none of that matters. His mother's clan defines him. He is Cherokee without qualification. Ross believes deeply in law, not as an abstraction, but as a mechanism. He understands American institutions from the inside. He believes that treaties once signed carry obligations, that courts exist to resolve conflict, that the Constitution means what it says. This belief will cost him dearly. As Georgia intensifies its campaign to dissolve Cherokee sovereignty, Ross responds not with violence, but with documentation. Petitions, letters, legal briefs, delegations to Washington. Thousands of Cherokee sign formal protests against removal. The signatures themselves are an argument. Literate names, written in Cherokee and English, insisting on recognition. Georgia responds by passing laws designed to make Cherokee existence impossible. The Cherokee government is declared illegal. Cherokee courts are dissolved. Cherokee citizens are forbidden from testifying against white settlers. Gold discovered on Cherokee land accelerates everything. Desire becomes policy. Law becomes weapon. The Cherokee appeal to the highest authority available, the Supreme Court of the United States. Cherokee Nation versus Georgia reaches the court in 1831. The question is simple and devastating. Is the Cherokee Nation a foreign state with the right to sue? Chief Justice John Marshall's answer is careful, evasive, and revealing. The Cherokee are not foreign, he says. They are a domestic dependent nation, like a ward to a guardian. The case is dismissed on jurisdictional grounds. The court does not deny Cherokee sovereignty outright. It simply refuses to enforce it. It is a loss disguised as restraint. Ross is disappointed but not defeated. Marshall's opinion leaves a door slightly open. That door opens with Worcester versus Georgia. Samuel Worcester, a missionary living in Cherokee territory, refuses to obey Georgia law requiring white residents to swear loyalty to the state. He is arrested, convicted, and imprisoned. The case reaches the Supreme Court in 1832. This time, Marshall is clear. Georgia's laws have no force within Cherokee territory. The Cherokee Nation is a distinct political community. Worcester must be released. It is a complete legal victory. For a brief moment, the world seems to pause. The highest court in the land has spoken. The Constitution has been upheld. Treaties affirmed. The Cherokee have won, not through war, but through law. And then nothing happens. President Andrew Jackson refuses to enforce the ruling. Whether or not he actually says the famous words attributed to him matters less than his actions. Georgia continues. The guard rides on. Cherokee homes are seized. Courts remain closed. The law exists on paper only. This is the moment where faith in the system fractures. The Cherokee have done everything asked of them. They have written laws, built institutions, adopted Christianity, farmed land, educated children, published newspapers, appealed to courts, won. And it does not matter. The realization arrives slowly, like cold. Not dramatic, just unmistakable. Law only works when those with power agree to be bound by it. The Cherokee are not dealing with misunderstanding. They are dealing with indifference backed by force. Internal divisions sharpen under this pressure. Some leaders begin to argue that resistance through law is no longer strategy but delay. Major Ridge emerges as the most prominent voice of this view. He is not ignorant. He is not traitorous by inclination. He is pragmatic to the point of despair. Ridge argues that removal is inevitable, that negotiating now may preserve lives, wealth, and cohesion, that waiting invites violence and chaos. He understands that signing such a treaty violates Cherokee law. He understands the penalty. He signs anyway. The Treaty of New Echota is negotiated by a small faction without authorization from the Cherokee National Council. It cedes all Cherokee land east of the Mississippi in exchange for money and land in the West. Fewer than 500 Cherokee sign. Over 16,000 oppose it. John Ross mobilizes immediately. Petitions flood Washington. Senators are lobbied. The treaty is exposed as fraudulent, illegitimate, unconstitutional. The opposition is overwhelming. The facts are clear. The Senate ratifies the treaty by a single vote. One vote. That is how the fate of an entire nation is sealed. Not by defeat in battle, not by legal failure, by arithmetic. Ross continues to fight. He refuses to recognize the treaty. He insists it does not represent the will of the people. He is correct. It does not matter. The countdown begins. 2 years are granted for voluntary removal. Many Cherokee refuse to believe it will come to force. They trust the law one last time. They trust reason. They trust the possibility of change. Georgia does not wait. Land lotteries distribute Cherokee farms to white settlers before removal even begins. Families return home to find strangers living in their houses, papers in hand, law as theft. By the time federal troops arrive, the Cherokee understand the truth they have been avoiding. The law did not fail them accidentally. It functioned exactly as designed. This is the final lesson of this era. Civilization was never the test. Law was never the shield. Equality was never the offer. The Cherokee did not lose because they were wrong. They lost because the system required them to. As soldiers begin to gather, as stockades are built, as homes are emptied at bayonet point, the era of argument ends. What follows will not be debated. It will be endured. The courts have spoken. History has moved on anyway. And the Cherokee are about to be forced to walk. When leaving was no long. By the spring of 1838, the waiting ends. Not because questions have been answered, but because patience has expired on the side that carries guns. The Cherokee do not wake up one morning ready to leave. No one ever is. They wake up to soldiers, to orders delivered without discussion, to the sudden realization that time, which had always been slipping away, quietal. General Winfield Scott arrives with thousands of troops, not to fight an enemy, but to move civilians, men, women, children, elders, farmers, artisans, council members, mothers who had just planted crops that will never be harvested, fathers who had believed until the very last moment that reason might intervene. Scott issues a proclamation offering 30 days to prepare his soldier. Houses are entered without ceremony. Families are given minutes, sometimes less, to gather what they can carry, not what they need, what they can physically lift before being pushed outside. Meals are left on tables, tools remain in sheds, fields are abandoned mid-season. This is. The Cherokee are marched to stockades scattered across their former homeland. Wooden enclosures meant to hold people temporarily, though no one is clear on how long temporary will last. Thousands are crowded into spaces never designed for human habitation. There is little shelter, less sanitation. Water is contaminated. Food is rationed inconsistently. Disease arrives almost immediately, not as an outbreak, but as an inevitability. Dysentery spreads first. Children weaken quickly. Elders do not recover. Families try to care for one another in conditions that make care almost impossible. Privacy disappears. Dignity follows. The Cherokee are not beaten constantly. They are not massacred. They are simply confined, which in some ways is worse. There is time to understand what is happening. John Ross is not present when his own family is taken. He is still in Washington, still petitioning, still arguing into rooms that have already decided to stop listening. By the time he learns what has happened, his home has been looted. His wife and children are in a stockade like everyone else. Leadership offers no immunity. It only adds responsibility. Summer heat intensifies suffering. Illness becomes constant. Death is frequent enough to lose its shock, but not its weight. Graves appear near the camps, some marked, some not. People begin to understand that the danger is not just removal, it is delay. Eventually, Ross secures a concession. The Cherokee will be allowed to organize their own removal. They will march in detachments, led by their own people, rather than being driven directly by soldiers. It is not mercy, it is logistics. Still, it matters. It allows a fragment of agency to survive. The journey west begins in the fall. 17 detachments, each roughly 1,000 people, spaced out to avoid overwhelming resources. The route stretches over 1,000 miles across mountains, rivers, and plains. The distance is abstract at first. It becomes very real with each step. The first problem is water. Drought leaves rivers too shallow for ferries. Detachments wait for weeks in exposed conditions. Then the weather shifts. The winter of 1838 arrives early and harsh. Snow, ice, freezing rain. Roads turn to mud, then to frozen ruts that break wagons and feet alike. Most Cherokee walk. Wagons are reserved for the sick and the very old, but there are never enough. Children walk until they cannot. Then they are carried. Then they are not. Shoes wear out quickly, feet bleed. Rags replace leather. Frostbite claims toes, then fingers. Food is inadequate. Rations are poorly supplied and poorly distributed. Hunger becomes constant. People ration what little they have, saving scraps for children, then for those who are ill, then not at all. Disease follows the weakened relentlessly. Pneumonia, measles, whooping cough. There is no place to stop and recover. Stopping means falling behind. Falling behind means being left. Death becomes part of the rhythm. Mornings begin with movement. Evenings end with burials when the ground allows it. When it does not, bodies are covered with stones or left beside the road. Families carry their dead as long as they can, then let them go because they must. One of those who dies is John Ross's wife, Quaddy. She walks despite illness, refusing to ride while others walk. She gives her blanket to a freezing child. She develops pneumonia and dies along the trail. Ross is not with her. He learns of her death days later. There is no time to stop. Leadership continues. Grief waits. Eyewitnesses record what they see years later, still haunted. Wagons creaking through snow, children silent from exhaustion, old men collapsing and being urged to stand until they cannot, soldiers watching without intervention. Some are kind, some are indifferent. The system does not care which. By the time the last detachments arrive in Indian Territory in the spring of 1839, thousands are dead. Estimates vary, but the number settles around 4,000 lost on the trail itself, with thousands more having died in the stockades before the journey even began. Nearly 1/3 of the nation is gone. The land they arrive in is unfamiliar, flat, sparse. Nothing like the mountains they left behind. There are no towns waiting, no prepared infrastructure. The Cherokee must build again immediately while mourning, while sick, while fractured. The removal does not end suffering. It reorganizes it. Grief follows them west, so does anger. The treaty that caused this was signed by a minority. Cherokee law demands punishment. In 1839, members of the Treaty Party are assassinated. Major Ridge, John Ridge, Elias Boudinot, killed by their own people under traditional law. A civil conflict ignites among survivors already broken. Violence continues for years, not because the Cherokee are prone to it, but because trauma does not evaporate on arrival. It settles, it hardens, it waits for opportunity. And yet even here, the pattern repeats. After the killing, after the chaos, the Cherokee stop. They negotiate peace among themselves. They reunite the nation. They rebuild a government. They reopen schools. They publish newspapers. They plant crops. They bury the dead properly when they can. The Trail of Tears is often described as an ending. It is not. It is a crossing point. A moment when the Cherokee lose almost everything that can be taken physically and are forced to discover what cannot. What survives is language, memory, law, identity. These are not abstract concepts on the trail. They are the difference between scattering and remaining a people. When the walking finally stops, the suffering does not end, but it changes shape. The Cherokee have been reduced, relocated, and wounded, but they have not vanished. That outcome, desired by many, has failed. The removal proves one thing with brutal clarity. The Cherokee did not misunderstand America. They understood it perfectly. They were simply overruled by power. What comes next will not be recovery in the usual sense. It will be persistence, and that, after everything, will be enough to begin again. After everything that was supposed to end them. When the walking finally stops, there is no moment of relief, no clear line separating catastrophe from whatever comes after. The Cherokee arrive in the West, not as survivors who have finished suffering, but as people who are still in the middle of it, just standing still for the first time in months. Bodies ache. Minds lag behind reality. Grief has not caught up yet. It is still unpacking itself. Indian territory does not greet them. It simply exists. Flat land, unfamiliar weather, no sacred mountains rising in the distance to orient memory, no ancestral towns waiting to be re-entered. The land is not hostile, but it is indifferent, which somehow feels worse. The Cherokee are expected to begin again immediately, as if endurance itself has been proof enough that they are ready. The first years are quiet in the way aftermaths usually are. People build shelters with whatever materials they can find. Families regroup, discovering who is missing only gradually as names fail to appear in the mornings. Councils meet again. Though attendance is thin and voices are changed, decisions must be made about governance, law, land distribution, education, all while the basic work of staying alive continues. Trauma does not announce itself loudly here. It shows up as hesitation, as anger that flares without warning, as silence where stories used to be. People who survived smallpox, wars, and removal now struggle with sleep, with memory, with the effort of caring again. The world has proven itself unreliable. Trust does not return quickly. The internal conflict that erupts after removal feels inevitable in hindsight. The treaty party assassinations are not a descent into savagery, as some outsiders will later frame them. They are the collision of law, grief, and betrayal inside a society already stretched past its limits. Cherokee blood law demands accountability. The Treaty of New Echota violated everything the nation stood for. The executions follow tradition, not impulse. But tradition does not protect against consequences. Retaliation follows. Families divide. Violence simmers for years, threatening to destroy what removal could not finish. For a time, it seems possible that the Cherokee might erase themselves from within. Completing the work others began. They do not. Slowly, painfully, reconciliation begins. Leaders intervene. Councils negotiate peace among the factions. In 1846, a treaty reunites the divided nation. It is not forgiveness, it is survival. The Cherokee understand something that history often forgets. Division is a luxury they can no longer afford. Once unity is restored, rebuilding accelerates. Schools reopen. The Cherokee male and female seminaries offer education that rivals institutions in the eastern United States. Students study literature, mathematics, science, languages. Literacy remains widespread. The syllabary sequoia created becomes a quiet backbone of continuity. Children learn to read the language of their ancestors, even as English presses in from every direction. Newspapers resume publication. Laws are rewritten. Courts function again. Roads are built. Farms expand. Within a generation, the Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma is once more a functioning, organized society. Not identical to what existed before, but undeniably alive. And once again, this becomes a problem. The United States is not finished. Survival does not equal permission. The Civil War arrives and drags the Cherokee into another conflict, not of their making. Old divisions resurface. Stand Watie aligns with the Confederacy. John Ross attempts neutrality, then flees. Cherokee fight Cherokee again. Homes burn. Crops are destroyed. Loss revisits families that have already lost too much. After the war, punishment follows. Treaties demand land, railroads cut through territory. Former slaves are incorporated into Cherokee citizenship under federal pressure. Autonomy shrinks again, this time under the language of Reconstruction and Reform. Then comes allotment. The Dawes Act presents itself as progress, individual land ownership, assimilation, opportunity. What it delivers is fragmentation. Communal land is divided into parcels. Anything left over is open to white settlement. Speculators descend with documents, lawyers, and alcohol. Cherokee land disappears through fraud more often than force. Within a generation, most of the land the Cherokee were given in the West is gone. In 1907, Oklahoma becomes a state. The Cherokee Nation's government is dissolved. Courts closed. Police disbanded. Leadership reduced to a ceremonial role appointed by Washington. On paper, the Cherokee Nation no longer exists. For decades, this is how it remains. A people without a recognized government. A nation without legal standing. Historians will later call this the Dark Period, as if darkness were an absence rather than a suppression. But absence is not what happens. Grandmothers continue to speak Cherokee in kitchens. Ceremonies continue quietly, away from officials who do not understand what they are seeing. Identity is passed through stories, not statutes. Children learn who they are even when schools tell them who they should become instead. The Cherokee do not vanish because disappearance requires cooperation. In 1970, policy shifts. Tribes are allowed to elect their own leaders again. The Cherokee do. A new constitution follows in 1976, another in 2003. Governance returns, not as restoration, but as continuation. The same idea expressed in a different century. In 2020, the Supreme Court affirms that reservation land was never legally dissolved. Worcester versus Georgia echoes forward nearly 2 centuries. This time the ruling stands, quietly, without spectacle. Law briefly aligns with reality. Today, the Cherokee Nation is the largest federally recognized tribe in the United States, hundreds of thousands of citizens, a functioning government, schools, courts, hospitals, language programs, the syllabary still taught, still used, still alive. This does not erase what happened. It does not redeem the past. It does something more understated. It refuses the finality that history keeps trying to impose. The Cherokee story is often framed as tragedy. That framing is incomplete. Tragedy implies an ending. What happened to the Cherokee is something else. It is a sustained attempt at erasure that failed repeatedly. They were not saved by benevolence. They were not rescued by law. They survived because they adapted without forgetting who they were, because they rebuilt faster than systems could dismantle them, because identity proved harder to confiscate than land. A nation, it turns out, is not a boundary on a map. It is not a treaty. It is not even a government, though those help. A nation is memory organized into responsibility. As long as that survives, so does everything else. Eventually, the Cherokee have walked through disease, war, law, betrayal, removal, and silence. They are still here, not as an exception, but as evidence. Evidence that disappearance is rarely as complete as those in power assume. Evidence that survival does not always look heroic. Sometimes it looks like rebuilding quietly while the world moves on. Lying in the quiet now, far from the stockades and trails, it is easy to imagine that history has resolved itself, that lessons were learned, that progress corrected what violence created. History does not work that way. But neither do people. And that, more than anything else, is why the Cherokee remain. The story does not end because it never belonged to the past alone.